Anyone paying attention to academic philosophy over the last decade or so will have noticed the new philosophical kid on the block. I'm talking about panpsychism. While a couple of decades ago, the position would have been laughed out of court or met with an incredulous stare, nowadays, an increasing number of analytic philosophers are taking panpsychism seriously. In this very brief lecture, I'm going to try to tell you why. It's important to recognize that this position goes all the way back to the very origins of Western philosophy. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, for example, said not only that all things flow, but also that everything has an inner fire, an ever-living fire, as he put it, a kind of soul that animates it from the inside out. Really, all human beings, for most of history, have accepted some version of this panpsychist view that the world is ensouled. Sometimes anthropologists refer to it as animism. Panpsychism is just the, you could say, more philosophical attempt to justify an animist worldview. But in the last few hundred years, in European and American or Western societies, panpsychism, animism increasingly began to seem superstitious and was replaced with a kind of materialism or physicalism, which is the view that the vast majority of the universe is just dead stuff moving through space and time according to fixed laws of physics. This view, physicalism, is now increasingly being challenged, and we'll see why. So the reason panpsychism is being taken seriously again by academic philosophers and scientists is because of this man, David Chalmers. Now, there are other reasons, of course, that academics and scientists are turning to this somewhat odd position, given the materialistic common sense that has reigned in Western societies for a few centuries now. But David Chalmers, in looking at the study of the brain, raised a problem. He called it the hard problem of consciousness. As he put it in his 1995 paper, quote, "What makes the hard problem hard and almost unique is that it goes beyond problems about the performance of functions. To see this, note that even when we have explained the performance of all the cognitive and behavioral functions in the vicinity of experience, like perceptual discrimination, categorization, internal access, verbal report, and so on, there may still remain a further unanswered question. Why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience?" So the hard problem of consciousness then is pointing out the fact that even if we understood everything there is to know about human behavior from a neurobiological point of view, understanding the functions of the brain in response to stimuli from the environment, putting that in an evolutionary context, even if we understood all of that, we could still ask the question, why is there anyone home inside? Why is there an experiential quality to any of that neurochemical going on? Why aren't we just zombies? There seems to be something extra left over to explain, even after all the physical stuff, all the physiological activity has been well understood. These are some contemporary panpsychist philosophers: Freya Matthews, Galen Strawson, Godehard Bruntrop, Philip Goff, Isabel Stengers. All of them are at least sympathetic to panpsychism, if not defending the position outright. And these are just some of the philosophers. There's also some scientists, Christoph Koch, as well as Michael Levin. Levin, for example, has been driven to adopt a kind of panpsychism in an attempt to understand the collectivity of the intelligence of cells. Human beings are multicellular organisms, and we develop from a single fertilized egg. And from Levin's point of view, that egg is itself a kind of packet of physics and chemistry. And somehow it becomes us. It becomes our unified sense of self-consciousness. And from Levin's point of view, the only way that this process could be organized is if cells are capable of participating in the achievement of goals at the level of a kind of what he calls morphospace, that no one cell in and of itself can even understand or perceive. And so there's this capacity for cells to merge to generate emergent levels of agency. We ourselves are an example of that. We read an essay for this module by this man, Charles Hartshorne, an American philosopher. And in his encyclopedia article on panpsychism, published in 1950, he defines the position this way. He says, panpsychism is the view that all things, in all their aspects, consist exclusively of souls, that is, of various kinds of subjects, or units of experiencing, with their qualifications, relations, and groupings or communities. Now, Hartshorne contrasts this version of panpsychism, let's call it true panpsychism, from other versions of panpsychism that he refers to as a kind of dual aspect approach. This would be the idea that everything has both a physical and a mental aspect. Rather than pushing dualism all the way down, as it were, whether it's in terms of dual aspects of some underlying monistic stuff, kind of dual aspect monism, or whether it's a true dualism of a sort of parallel substances put in a pre-established harmony from the beginning of time, Hartshorne wants rather to just do away with what we might think of as a kind of mind-independent matter and adopt this idea that really, as Whitehead put it, apart from the experiences of subjects, there is nothing, bare nothingness. So there is no matter independent of a subject who is perceiving it. Now, Hartshorne wants to be very clear that this is not a kind of idealism. In dismissing matter as a kind of abstraction and replacing matter or materialistic atoms with a kind of psychic atoms, Hartshorne is still a realist. He's saying there really are other psyches out there independent of our own psyche. And so in contrast to idealism, Hartshorne wants to say that panpsychists resist this monistic tendency, either to reduce finite individuals to the absolute mind, kind of absolute spirit or mega mind, and also to reduce any particular level of consciousness to its subcomponents. There are many levels of mind operative in the universe, many rhythms and phases of experience that are operating in complexly entangled ways. A lot of people like to throw rocks at panpsychists by, incredulously demanding to know if we really think that rocks can think or that rocks feel pain. And Hartshorne points out here that, quote, I quote him, "It is always to be borne in mind that what a panpsychist cannot interpret as a single sentient subject, he may be able to deal with as a group or crowd of subjects, like Leibniz in his monadology, or as an element in a more comprehensive single subject, like Fechner, who we'll learn more about in a moment." So the idea is that what we think of as solid inanimate objects, tables and chairs and rocks, mountains, and so on, they're really aggregates of micro subjects. And the solidity of these and the inertness of these objects is really just a function of this kind of aggregation and this statistical canceling out of the agency of the constituents, the psychic constituents of those aggregates. So from Hartshorne's point of view, to say mind is everywhere does not mean that all finite individual minds must be reduced to the one mind. There's room, there's elbow room in the universe for individuality, for self-creativity at the level of the constituents. Now, if panpsychism is this kind of pluralistic realism, one problem that has been pointed out is the so-called combination problem. Can minds really be made of other minds? What is the psychic or mental chemistry that explains the way that higher minds emerge from lower minds, bigger minds from smaller minds? This problem was first pointed out by William James in his Principles of Psychology, and he revisits this problem again in A Pluralistic Universe, which we also read from. James, in A Pluralistic Universe, realizes that the solution to this problem, at the end of the day, must be to let go of our desire to intellectually or logically explain in terms of abstract concepts how this might be possible, and instead just accept our immediate experience of the fact that it is so, that minds do interpenetrate and relate with one another. James writes, our intelligence cannot wall itself up alive like a pupa in its chrysalis. It must, at any cost, keep on speaking terms with the universe that engendered it. And here's Fechner, who believed in an earth soul, that all human beings and all plants and animals were mini souls embedded within this mega soul of the earth itself, which he thought of as a kind of angelic being floating through heaven along with the other planets and stars. He writes, our whole body and every organic creature body is built of cells, each cell a wall filled with fluid, and the wall gradually thickening from outside to inside. The earth, with its relatively thin wall, also gradually thickening from outside to inside with its liquid content, is only the greatest model and at the same time the mother cell of all these cells. James writes quite favorably of Fechner's view in A Pluralistic Universe. James writes now, that the concrete pulses of experience appear pent in by no such definite limits as our conceptual substitutes for them are confined by. They run into one another continuously and seem to interpenetrate. Now, James here is foreshadowing another panpsychist, pan-experientialist if you prefer, and undoubtedly the most systematic speculative philosopher in the 20th century to adopt the panpsychist position. I'm talking about Alfred North Whitehead. Let's hear a little bit more from James here when he recognizes how, despite what abstract logic says with its watertight categorical compartments, our direct experience shows us that moments run into one another continuously. They interpenetrate, right? He continues, what in them is relation and what is matter related is hard to discern. You feel no one of them as inwardly simple, and no two as wholly without confluence where they touch. There is no datum so small as not to show this mystery, if mystery it be. The tiniest feeling that we can possibly have comes with an earlier and a later part, and with a sense of their continuous procession. So James here is describing what he elsewhere calls the specious present. It's the way in which the present moment also affords us direct intuition of the past and of the future. So the present is not cut off from past and future. The experience is a flow, and it has a continuity to it, even while it allows us to achieve individual perspectives, right? So there's both a transitional, continuous aspect to experience, and there's also in Whitehead's terms, a concrescent or an atomistic component. These are psychic atoms, remember, not material atoms. And Whitehead's attempt to provide a logic of this process of experience comes in the form of his idea of concrescence. Concrescence is the process whereby the many become one and are increased by one. This is his attempt to save William James from the charge of anti-intellectualism. James was willing to forego logic in favor of the direct deliverances of life in order to understand the place of consciousness in nature. In this, as he referred to it, a kind of his own empirical movement towards a pluralistic panpsychic view of the universe. Whitehead wants to provide a logic that can account for this process so that we don't have to just appear to be anti-intellectual. So Whitehead's process of concrescence is describing these units of experience, these occasional subjects, as having a physical pole, prehending perished objects in the past environment or the objective data, responding to them with a subjective form or some kind of emotional tonality in their physical pole. And then these units of experience in a mental pole grow together with ingressions of eternal objects or pure potentials, with many of those eternal objects being negatively prehended in this process of growing towards satisfaction. Each moment of experience is this aesthetic process, right, that builds on what came before, gathering in the many perished objects of the past, allowing those objects to grow together into a new unit of experience. A new subject is achieved. And once that satisfaction is achieved, it becomes what he calls a superject. And then that superject perishes, launching itself into the future to be inherited as an object in the next unit of experience, in the next subjective occurrence. So we can see here how, I'm not able to go into detail, of course, but Whitehead does provide a logic of process whereby experience can be understood in a drop-like way, pulses of experience that can grow together. And this is Whitehead's attempt to dissolve, you might say, the combination problem, which, if panpsychism solves the hard problem of consciousness, many critics point out, well, it has this new problem, the combination problem. I think Whitehead's process-relational solution allows us to adopt the panpsychic view of the universe without facing the sorts of problems that materialism does or physicalism, namely, why should there be consciousness at all in a physical universe, as well as the problems of dualism, which have to do with how mind or the psychic interior dimension could ever relate to matter or the exterior physical dimension. And I think panpsychism is also a less inflated alternative to idealism, where everything becomes one absolute mind that our finite minds fail to notice for some strange reason. And only these idealist philosophers who have the intuition of the absolute can report to us that it is indeed real, despite the fact that many of us have never seen nor heard it. I think panpsychism is the more radically empirical alternative to these other philosophical positions. And indeed, I think the psychedelic experience, as some empirical data is already beginning to show, affords itself of the panpsychist interpretation. Mind extends far beyond just the boundaries of our skull, even while it has some contour and is differentiated, right? It's not just when we say mind is everywhere, that it's a kind of soup that we're swimming in. It is individuated. It comes in the form of selves, or cells, you might say. Thanks for your attention.